somebody.
Hello.
Hey guys, hear me?
Yeah, we're hearing.
Hello? Okay. There was just a lot of noise, a lot of echo all of a sudden. I don't know why. Tambio Benson, film industry journalist, film critic for 15 years, currently based in San Francisco. Currently developing a platform that focuses on African film almost exclusively, called Akoroko, and I launched it in 2022. And that's really the short end of it. I think I'll just stop there and pass it on to the next person.
Great. Thank you. Should we go with Johnny Muteba next?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Johnny Muteba. I'm based in South Africa, but originally from the DRC. So I grew up here. I'm the chairman and founder of the Pan African Chamber of Commerce. I'm also representing the Atlanta Black Chambers of Commerce in South Africa. I'm also a founder of a company called Build Africa Group. So we work in the affordable housing space, where our mission really is to inspire people to build a better Africa. I'm a storyteller. I'm a creative entrepreneur. I'm also an investor. So I'm here basically today to see how we can collaborate and really build a global Pan-African ecosystem, which is basically something I've been doing for the past 23 years or so now. So I'm here, Anna invited me, love the vision, and I'm here also to add value to this new narrative of our continent. I am setting up a television channel this year called Pan African TV. Pan African TV exists to discover, develop, and distribute media content about Africa and the global Black experience. So, yeah, that's all about me for now.
Thank you. Let's move on to Hilliard Guess.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I am Hilliard Guess. I am in West Hollywood, California. I'm a writer, producer, podcaster. Sometimes I direct. I'm executive producer right now on a Amazon series, Alex Cross. We're doing kind of a spin-off companion bonus series to it that I run that show. And also I'm gearing up right now to go produce a movie in Provincetown, September through October, and just very, very involved at the Writers Guild. A big component for diversity and equity, inclusion, stuff like that. I have one of the biggest podcasts out called Screenwriters Rant Room, hence I'm wearing my shirt. I also do the Writers Guild podcast, Third and Fairfax podcast. Very involved in the Black community here in Hollywood, and here to support what you guys are doing. So, thank you.
Thank you. And next, Mark Ozzy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Anna, for this platform. It's beautiful to see and meet all of you. Hello, Tato. I just wanted to recognize. So my name is Makhosi Anita Tau. I come from Botswana, and I am currently based in Syracuse, New York. I am a writer, screenwriter, poet, and I am a storyteller, and I just use multimodal forms and mediums to convey my stories. So that just looks like anything and everything from poetry, but my focus largely is on film. So I am a filmmaker. I have written for television too. And I'm looking to connect, to explore, and also to, carry my work into Afro-diasporic audiences that are ready and willing to see themselves in cinema. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we have online Tamara.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Tamara Dawit. I'm an Ethiopian Canadian producer. Today, I'm joining us virtually from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many different Indigenous nations. I think I'm probably here today mostly wearing my producer hat. I train a lot with primarily Indigenous and racialized filmmakers on production, both in Canada and Europe and in East Africa. In terms of the things I produce, they're pretty much only Ethiopian, Eritrean, or other East African stories. So hopefully I can lend a bit of a production or producer's perspective to some of the conversation around screenwriting.
Thank you. And last but not least, Russell. You're muted, Russell. Russell Anyango.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, can you hear me? Okay, good. Thanks for the invitation, Anna. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this esteemed panel. I'm a writer, I'm a producer. I've worked with, we have a company, Emerge Media, which is part of Black Medley, done a series of documentaries, TV series, YouTube type of shows, and all with the aim of amplifying Africa and being able to tell new narratives that capture the richness that we've grown up knowing. Right now, I'm working on a series of stories based on the rich nostalgia of the 90s, which if we look at Africa right now, one of the biggest exports is Afrobeats. And those seeds were planted in the 90s. And so I'm working on stories that trace that up to the point of what has become the global phenomenon now. So the narrative, are creating a narrative around that context of what's exploding right now.
Great, thanks. And then I'm going to just share that this panel obviously sits under the wider scope of the Pan African Screenwriters retreat, which is where we're at now. We're dialing in from South Carolina's Penn Center, which has a whole bag of historical context in terms of the Pan African audience, its vision, and its members. And I'm here with Tato Mosa, who's one of the mentors on the retreat. We have another mentor, Zirsanai Mahari, who I think is also dialed in from Addis Ababa today. Yeah, and that's who we're going to be sharing the panel with. So I'm going to kick right into it and just open it up first to those of you dialing in from the continent to hear a little bit about what does the Pan-African screenwriting industry look like. So I want to just ask Johnny in South Africa and Z, who's currently in Addis, if you want to speak up and share on that, like, and then we'll bring it to what it looks like in the diaspora. And also from Hilliard, you can put your input on what that means for the African-American community out here. So let's start with you, Johnny. Johnny, you're muted if you're trying to speak. Okay.
Oh my God. I was okay. So thank you so much. Let me just do this again. So my passion really, especially from a Pan-African perspective, comes down to working as a collaboration to deconstruct the negative image and perception of Africa in the media here at home, but also in the media around the globe. But we then need to empower storytellers, give them a platform for them to thrive and succeed. At the core of what I do at the Pan African Chamber is really to make sure that 5 things actually happen. And I'm definitely bringing those 5 things into this conversation. Anna and I had a conversation as well, I think sometime last week. The first thing that we want to do is to make sure that we increase the visibility, the profitability, the impact, and the influence of African storytellers, right? Or African screenwriters, as it were. we have 5 objectives that will really help us achieve this plan that we have. The first objective is to make sure that we strengthen the partnership and collaboration between the private sector, the public sector, and the creative sector. Because I'm a filmmaker and I've been working in this space for such a long time, I realized that I have a privilege of really being in the room with decision makers, either from the private sector perspective or the public sector perspective. When I speak to the private sector, I don't see creatives. When I speak to the public sector, I don't see creatives in the room as well. So we want to make sure that we can bring everyone in the room. This is what we've been doing since 2015, and we've been quite successful in doing that. Objective number 2 is around training tomorrow's industry workforce today. So the screenwriters of tomorrow, where are they today? What is missing as well here on the continent is that we don't have many mentors. So I always say mentors are missing in action. And I did mention this to Anna when we spoke before. I have a lot of South African filmmakers who are my friends. They will go to other countries on the continent to shoot. They can go to Namibia, they can go to Botswana, they can go to Ethiopia. They leave nothing behind, right? They are there in and out. So we need to make sure that we bring in people who are experienced, like some of you here on the call, to then begin to mentor the leaders of tomorrow of this particular sector. Objective number 3 is around enhancing funding and financial support. When there's no money, honestly, even good ideas, amazing ideas are never going to see the light of day. So we are now setting up a platform called the Pan African Film Commission. Through the Pan African Film Commission, we'll also be able to establish a fund at a later stage whereby people with stories can actually come to us and we fund those stories. I realize as well that people with stories don't have money, people with money don't have stories. So we have to be able to address that. Objective number 4 is around building the infrastructure, the creative industry infrastructure. So I always look forward to empowering more and more entrepreneurs, because we do have a problem here in Africa. That is a problem of joblessness, youth unemployment specifically. If you look at the continent of Africa, every single year, and this was before COVID, 10 million young people graduate every single year. They leave universities, then they are going towards the marketplace. But out of 10 million who are graduating, only 3 million get employed. This was before COVID. I honestly don't know what that picture is like now. We have to follow up so that we give you guys up to date reality on the ground. So we want to make sure that we can build the infrastructure. This infrastructure needs to be schools, basically film and television academies. We have some of them here. Some of the biggest on the continent are in South Africa. But I saw something that producers from Nigeria were going to Brazil to learn. Brazil speaks Portuguese. And I said to the team, why did they not come to South Africa? We want to make sure that we strengthen this collaboration as well from a Pan-African perspective, whereby talent can move within our continent. We are not saying that people should not go to Brazil or come to the US where you are, or go to Europe. But if we are able to build here, I am always, an ambassador of Pan-African integration, Pan-African economic integration, even though we can also speak about global cooperation. Objective number 5, and the most important one, is to market Brand Africa. We know that Brand Africa has a problem not really of our own. Many people benefit from the fact that we are portrayed as a continent that is in need of charity, where there's instability, where there's wars and diseases and all of that. It is then incumbent literally to all of us who are telling stories, whether through business, I actually tell the stories of African businesses, or screenwriters. So we have to be conscientized that you are writing about a continent that is stereotyped. Therefore, the stories that you're going to be making must not entrench this behavior. So we want to make sure that we are able to create value. We are able to create value to just wait. We are able to create value so that every person who's telling a story in Africa or about Africa anywhere in the world can actually put a positive story out there. Where I'm sitting as we start funding these films, I have to tell you that I am not going to find a film that is actually stereotyping our continent. We are leaving that to Hollywood. We want to set up Afriwood. Afrowood has to be pro-African. I'm not saying that all the negative stories, I'm just going to say I'm not going to fund. I have to understand the context. Somebody came to me a few years back wanting me to fund the film, and the story she wanted to tell was like Blood Diamond 2.0, that one particularly happening in the DRC, where I happen to be from. The story was about an American girl who came there. She was taken by the militia. And I'm like, no, I cannot actually fund a story like that. As an African, as a Congolese, you are telling a story like that, negative about my country. I will not go somewhere else and get money from there. So that's basically what I'm looking at doing through this platform, this collaboration with Anna. Lastly, we will be organizing a film festival in the US later on this year, the Hollywood African Film Festival. And of course, for the birthday in San Francisco, I will also be bringing the US Africa Tech Summit the early next year, around about March or April. So I am going to stop here for now. And thank you so much, Anna, for the opportunity.
Thank you. So just to recap, I'm hearing some of the challenges as bridging between the creatives and investors, challenges around training, in particular, mentorship opportunities, infrastructure of the creative industry, the fact that some of the stories remain stereotypical, and just our challenges in compromising on our authenticity. If I've missed anything as I recap, please put it in the chat, because I just want to capture everything. And then that way we can build on it. Z, you're dialing in from Addis. Did you want to add anything there before we open it up to the diaspora?
Hi everyone. Actually, I'm here to listen and to learn from this amazing panel. So nothing to add, but I'll be listening.
Okay. So in terms of the diaspora, I just want to bring that question in terms of like what the Pan-African industry looks like for screenwriters, to Tambe first.
Well, it's first of all, it's like we have to first define what Pan African is, and then we have to look. My focus is on Africa specifically, and maybe I'll piggyback more. So what? I'm sorry, what's the gentleman's name who just spoke before me was Johnny. What Johnny was saying, and then try to broaden out a little bit, but I'll be concise. Um, from let's say a 30,000 foot view, from a high level view, there's a lot of what I call foundational work that has to be done first. So he already listed many of the challenges, from infrastructure to training, education, and the like. Um, Basically, what I'm saying is that there's just work that has to be done before we even begin to address some of these very specific issues when it comes to screenwriting. I've read a lot of script. I've seen a lot of films, a lot of African films, a lot of African diaspora films, and what my own approach is currently is, and the message that I spread is essentially encouraging filmmakers of African descent to effectively sort of move the needle and push the envelope and try some new things and experiment, and in some ways even go back to sort of some sort of very elemental aspects of African storytelling, some traditional. I mean, we talk about the oral tradition, which is a very sort of reductive way to define it all. But it's time. It's time for writers to begin to. Um, I said something once about Ben Okri, the Nigerian author, said something about breaking your hands when he was writing The Famished Road, for example. Since we're talking about writing, and when he was writing The Famished Road, he said he could not fit a sort of what the sort of Western um, uh, film school thinking when they talk about screenwriting and the three-act story structure. And he could not fit his story into the story of a spirit child into a three-act story structure. And so he had to, what he said, break his hands and go back to the roots of language, go back to his sort of elemental Nigerian upbringing and begin from there, as opposed to using the style and the methods and the philosophies of storytelling that he had picked up in American and I think European institutions. So um, what I recommend and what I suggest to most many of the film screenwriters is reconsider or reframe the conversation around what a story looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, and ignore everything that, even though we talk about education, I guess the thing that we say is learn the trade and then learn the rules and then break them. But maybe there's something to not even learning them at all. You look at a filmmaker like Jibril Diop Mambetsi, who had no film school training, and he made what is considered one of the classic African films in Tukibuki in 1973. He just picked up a camera and he went with gut and instinct and experience, and he believed, and a certain kind of a confidence that comes from knowing that you have something to say as an African, as a black man in Africa, as a black man in this world, and everything else be damned. Like no one is going to tell me how to tell my stories. Uh, so I encourage. I guess maybe I'm sort of diving more into the sort of theoretical and philosophical aspects of it, but I encourage filmmakers to uh, approach screenwriting, approach storytelling from that perspective, uh, especially African filmmakers, especially African storytellers, because if I mean, we are essentially the ones to kind of do it, I think, because um, there's still an emerging film culture, if you will, and if now is not the time to experiment and to try things as these industries are still evolving and still developing, um, I don't know when is. So this is the time to break our hands and really define what it means to be an African storyteller. Not necessarily reinventing the wheel. There have been African storytellers obviously before us, but what does this generation have to say? And what does the next generation have to say? What do we learn from the past? What do we learn from the past filmmakers? From the Sembens all the way to the Safi Fayez, all the way to the uh, Wanuri Kayus, to Mati Diop today, and Alice Diop, and uh, what can we take from those experiences? What can we learn, and what can we do to move forward? Or how can we move forward and tell our stories the way that we want to tell them, and sort of in a very sort of authentic manner. Um, so the industry itself, I mean, I think this is an industry from a 30,000 foot view. I think the global film industry is looking for that really authentic, um, unapologetic, maybe is what I'm looking for, unapologetic African um, storytelling or filmmaking. And I don't mean that when I say that, I don't mean in some sort of stereotypical uh, sense, but really what I see often is African filmmakers mimicking what they've seen in Hollywood movies or in European art house cinema. Um, or sometimes you see sort of a merging of the three, where it's like you have something that's a story that's rooted in local culture, but the filmmaker borrows some, like maybe C.J. Obasi's Mami Wata, for example, um, very rooted in Nigerian folklore, but then he uses stylistically European art house cinema filmmaking to tell the story. So it's very stylized, uh, but it's still, again, everything else, the location, the people, the language, the story, the folklore are still very rooted in local culture. But somehow he makes a very local story universal, I think, partly because of the stylistic sensibilities that he employs to tell the story and to make the film. Um, so that's sort of, merging of a sort of a convergence of different experiences and different influences that he had. From again, but from a global industry perspective, as a film critic, as a journalist who covers the continent, but also has covered much of the African diaspora for 15 years. The world is ready for African storytellers to tell their stories the way that they want to tell them, as opposed to mimicking what they've seen. And I see a lot of that, which is unfortunate. I see a lot of mimicking of sort of Hollywood studio style films. Um, Even when the budget, obviously the budget is not there, the infrastructure is not there, and the talent is not quite there. So it's sort of a silly to even attempt to do that. So I would suggest that uh, that African filmmakers begin to um, search for something that is authentic to them, and essentially, like I said initially, break your hands and stop trying to be something, stop trying to look like something, and just be, um, and see what that takes you. Because I really think that that's what the world is looking for. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. It might even be very difficult. But I think it's time to begin to do that, as opposed to trying to fit inside of the box that the global industry may have put us in the past. It's time to break out that box. It's time to just blow up the box and start from a place of a really personal, sort of instinctual, actually instinctual kind of a place of storytelling. Because there is a tradition. We are rooted in rich traditions, and we don't really, I don't think anyway, exploit and explore and exploit those traditions in a way that we could cinematically. We're not even scratching the surface. So I will leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. So did anybody else want to chime in from a diasporic perspective before I open it up to Hilliard? No? Does anyone want to share anything?
Yeah, I can go in. So I just wanted to share that, I've always believed that like my perception of Pan-Africanism, it is synonymous with, restoration, with repetitive writing, humanity, and dignity. So one of the things that I've been very interested in is how we can advance ethnographic research and also excavating like archives to be able to bring our old narratives to the forefront, because essentially most of our histories have been penned with a colonial mind frame. And so I think one of the things that is up for adoption is, decolonization and methods that can help us to be fearless about excavating where we're coming from as a people and being able to write our own history as is. I think also I was going to share that, and just to add on to what Johnny said, I think he spoke about mentorship, and I think that there is a space in between where film graduates are done with our courses and the industry. And there's a lot, like in Botswana currently, there's a lot of film graduates, but not a lot of opportunities. And I think mentorship is one way that can really help advance and bridge that gap, where the pairing of those that have gone before us can help to pull up those that are still behind. I think I wanted to also say that when it comes to Pan-Africanism and the development of African narratives, there's been a very selective mindset in leadership when it comes to positioning other African industries to be at the forefront of progression. And I'll give you an example. Every time that I am applying and looking out for opportunities for myself and others that I work with, there's always a barrier of, geography. So you'd see that there are places that have been selected to advance. And this is where we get more of the narratives that we've been seeing, as opposed to countries like Botswana, Lesotho. And so for me, what Pan-Africanism should mean is that there is equity and there's opportunity that is equal for different nations to also advance and create and have access to those opportunities. I think that capacity building in leadership is very important, so that when we get to those spaces where we're able to make decisions, these decisions can be a reflection of the diversity that Africa has to offer, as well as the diaspora. I think there's I've had many challenges having made my films in Botswana and also having made a documentary where I was filming across Africa. I've had challenges in being able to develop some of my ideas here because there's always ceilings and limitations about what people understand culturally and contextually. So when that development comes into play, that means those with the power and the money to create can advance what they understand. So I think we need to be showing up in spaces of producing and in being able to privilege these narratives and these creators. And that'll just help us curb this, this idea of just gatekeeping. And I think that there is an act, it's a very hostile act of erasure to be selective about what we progress. If we are to act as a unit, we should all want everyone to come on and move forward and upward together. So that's just something that I want to add. And I think I wrote here that no part of Africa should be left behind. And that's just a stance that I'm very strong in. And, as a screenwriter, there's so many things that I want to share right now, and I'll just read them because I know that we have to move on. So there's the idea of income generation that is consistent, as well as the protection of this income, health insurance for writers, the challenges that artificial intelligence presents to writers, and how that sometimes offers a blockage. And then the collaboration oversteps. For instance, when large studios, some from Hollywood, come in and create, I'll give you an example. A United Kingdom was filmed in Botswana, and just the process of it was just kind of imitating the colonialist way of creating. And so there is a need to, explore these challenges. And if we are truly Pan-African, if I am tasked with directing a film in a country that I'm not from, I should be able to root myself in the culture and the identity of the people that I am about to serve, and also provide opportunities with my voice for those people. I think the next point is that there is a fear of critique because we are African. And I love Audre Lorde because she talks about presenting stories, all manner of stories, good and bad. And so to advance Africa, we just tell the stories that we believe are good because we've been seen a certain way. But I think there's also good in showing the things that we dislike, the things that we stand against, because many of my films have turned out to be confrontation and confronting authoritarianism, confronting issues that affect women and children. And so with that, I will close because I do notice that I've said a lot, but thank you again. And I do believe that today there will be a lot that will be said that will steer us in the right direction.
Wow. Thank you. So I'm just going to recap my notes just because, as I said, the end product of this conversation will be a kind of a straw man where I'm hoping to capture everything that this panel discusses. So if I miss anything as I recap sporadically, just jot it in the chat and I'll add it to the notes. But from Tambe's points, I have the importance of building a foundation, just reclaiming that conversation. So a lot of doing the work and hitting the ground running, opportunities to learn the rules and break them, but also just encouraging and suggesting a more unapologetic voice and not compromising again on that authenticity, to Johnny's point earlier. And from Makosi, I'm hearing you defining Pan-Africanism as being ingrained in restoration, encouraging more archiving, documentation, and research to advance our own decolonization stories, filling that space between the graduates and entering the industry. Again, to Johnny's point on mentorship, geographic challenges, creating opportunities and access beyond borders, capacity building and leadership, which is a huge point in itself, but I'm just gonna leave it there
Can I add
as its own
something, Anna?
point, and then leaving no part of Africa behind, using inclusivity in all of our strategies, and then a lot of the points I'm just jotting down that can be expanded into huge discussions, but income generation, health insurance, and the impact of AI. So I hear
Can I add
Russell,
something?
did you want to add something?
Yes, I want to add something, and just to tie in some aspects of like what was said in respect to what like Tambe said when it comes to being unapologetic with storytelling and the different finance aspects in terms of the incentives around making films. From my experience, I've worked with like the British Council, the American Embassy to get and even the NBA to get funding for different type of projects. But that has proved to be kind of challenging when it comes to sustainability. Now my question comes about, and it's kind of I'm presenting a perspective and also presenting a question. When it comes to film, and when we look at music, because I kind of work in those two arenas, when it comes to film, we are yet to coalesce the fans of the films, the supporters and that nature of things such that they're a uniting force where you can say, hey, this film is opening this day and you'll have the army of African film lovers that come to show it, if it's whether they're in Nigeria, Kenya, or South Africa, wherever they come from, so long as there's a film coming out, there's an army that's out there to support it. The reason why I say that is because like when it comes to music, Afrobeats is doing exactly what we are working to achieve as film in terms of the music is unapologetic, the stories are told, they're microfilms, and as of last year and the 2 years before, we've had Madison Square Garden being sold out by Davido, Burna Boy, and I think it was Kiss Daniel, Wizkid. They've all sold out the Madison Square Garden. These are just as individual artists in Afrobeats, and they're pretty much telling African stories they're telling unapologetic African stories in their music. And so when you look at that angle of how Afrobeats is exploding in this day and age, and then you look at the 90s when hip hop was blowing up, you see how an Ice Cube, Will Smith blew up as a result of they're hip hop artists, but they're able to tap into film and become phenomenal stars in that aspect of things. And right now, when we look at Afrobeats and storytelling, we have a movie that just came out this year with Tiwa Savage, a movie called Water and Gary that's currently in Amazon, and that channel is already being created. But in terms of an army to support it, because when music comes out, Afrobeat fans will rush to consume this content, buy tickets and all this nature of things. But the movie Water and Gary came out with Tiwa Savage, but do we have like that army built up whereby an African film comes out, we have that same type of rallying move such that it can show that financial viability and be able to do like, 1,000 or 1,400 screens if that need arises, or do phenomenal streaming numbers when it comes to Amazon? Like, how well are we creating that bridge? Because Afrobeats is doing really well when it comes to penetrating into the global market in this particular day and age. And it's like films telling our films are kind of, while they're rich stories, they're engaging stories, and there's still more improvement to be done. We are a little bit turning up the financial aspect of it is a challenge. And so how are we going to marry that aspect of film to what's being very successful in terms of an apologetic storytelling like it is in Afrobeats today?
All right, thank you. So I've tried to capture that too, and just to summarize, looking at other elements within the entertainment industry for overlapping financial prospects, such as the music industry and its current Afrobeats global sensation. And then also like market penetration. I heard you talk about, using new technology and the social media channels that are available to kind of bridge between, like you said, maintaining an authenticity in our stories and actually penetrating these markets financially. Should we move on to Hilliard for your input on what the industry looks like now? And then we'll move on to the next question.
It's interesting. First of all, hearing this, it sounds like I'm talking to my friends here in Hollywood. I mean, it's very, very similar. We have some of the same issues, believe it or not. There are some, I'd say since George Floyd, there's been some increase upwardness, if it will, as far as hiring in Hollywood. As far as shows getting some green lights in some ways that wouldn't have before. As far as programs, there've been a lot of them. You guys have probably heard that a lot of the diversity programs have now been cut and stuff like that. So we knew that was going to happen. It was going to be like I always say it's like a cycle. There's like a 2 or 3 year cycle where things are jamming and then all of a sudden they kind of go. Okay. My birthday's coming up. I don't know. Anyway, so it's fascinating listening to everybody, and everybody's talking about the issues that they have. We have a lot of the same issues. Although I'm hearing I have a couple friends who are from Africa who live in Hollywood, who are writers. I had one of them on my podcast a few weeks ago. She co-wrote that Netflix series called The African Queen Jinga. That's out. I don't know if they have that in everybody's countries where they are. Such an amazing, amazing documentary. It's like a 4-part series. And so she was telling me, for example, that when she was brought in to do the show, that the producers were looking for an African writer, 2 in particular. So I believe the other writer is African, but they're from England or live in England, and she's from Africa, but she lives here. If they believe that's the story and how it was. So according to her, some of the jobs she's getting is because they're actually looking for more authentic in this culture that's happening today. Hollywood is starting to catch up a little with not just making things, but actually involving us in things. And the main thing is nuance. You know, if you don't have the nuance of the subject, it's awful, you know, and that's the thing that everybody's trying to avoid nowadays. And even including myself, I've been brought in to come and fix something or to enhance a script somewhere. I developed a series a few years ago about the origins of reggae music, and it's a big global international project with a really big producer that we all know. And my background is what actually got me that project. And you know, I grew up in the Bay Area, even though I'm from Detroit and set in New York and all that, but I grew up in the Bay Area in the whole mod punk rock rude boy world. So my background gave me the fact that I'm such a reggae head and ska head was it's always about what's your background, you know, who are you? Why are you the expert? You know what I mean? And whatever it is. So and I write underdog stories. I write underdog stories in the murder, death, kill world. So being where I'm from, I've always been the underdog. So that is like my calling card. And I think what's usually missing in most people's work is jumping around between what you like as opposed to finding your lane and what you're going to be superb at, you know, when you're going to be a superstar. And I found for myself that no matter what it is, I can always insert myself when I find the point of view of that underdog character that I could lead myself with. You know what I mean? I believe it. Forgive me, I can't say your name. You spoke. Makosi?
Makosi?
Yes. I felt like you had a really strong point of view, on the type of work that you do. And I'm already curious to see what your work looks like, because you defined a lane, you know what I mean? And that told me a lot about yourself, even though you didn't go into a bunch of your backstory. Um, I was going to say there's a couple things happening in Hollywood. Like every year, like every other year or so for the last few years, I do the panels at Nollywood and Hollywood. So I've been helping them out, trying to build that. Of course, we have the Pan African Film Festival, which is probably one of the biggest ones. It wasn't years ago, but now it's grown to become one of the biggest ones here in Hollywood. Let me see, I wrote down something else. Oh, I have a few friends I've been offered through my podcast to come over to like Nigeria and a couple other places to come speak or to do a workshop or something, teach them how we run a writer's room, whatever. But, the resources there are different. So whereas somebody would fly me to New York to go do a workshop, they can't do that, there. So there's always like this wall of something in the way, keeping us from getting there to help you guys the way we could. My thing is for those people who do go over there, whether they're in England or here in America, going to Africa or any other Brazil, wherever, to teach and to encourage. There has to be like a middle ground where you teach them what we do, but you have to understand the resources and the nuance and the culture that is there. Because what would be horrible is for all of those other countries to now look like we do in America. It should still look and feel like you, but maybe there's more technical skills to how you advance the way that the story is written, or elevate the way the actors are, the way it's directed, and all that other stuff. But it's still going to be very hard to have all that and to keep who you are in it. So I think it was Tambe or one of the guys said, how do you hold on to keeping them, as the culture is without losing it, in the American way or the UK way and all that other stuff. So I just support that, I totally messed up what you said, Tambe, but I understood it. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks, Hilliard. And that's a great way actually to segue onto my next subject really for discussion here. You mentioned kind of cross-border trainings, and I think the first time I organized a workshop flying in Hollywood cinematographers and writers into Nairobi was now about 20 years ago. But as you said, like there are these cycles and trends that happen when something like George Floyd explodes. And so I definitely acknowledge and second, just the fact that there is an existing new emphasis on nuance and authenticity, and not just in Hollywood, but in general, because of the way the industry has changed, that access with technology has reached more people. And so it's a bit more difficult to kind of project a closed-minded perspective, right? And so as we have a search for more authenticity, pretty much invading the continent right now, is so many people looking, like you said, oh, who's an African writer for this program, or who's this to make this story more authentic? How do we define that middle ground, right? That's really what I want to know. And as a writer myself, I think most of you can relate. It all starts with your audience, right? And so I think it's not that they're wanting more nuanced productions, it's that the audience is actually demanding it. And that's because we've created an audience that just couldn't be limited anymore in the way that it was. So let's look at defining this Pan-African audience. If I am a writer, wherever I am, whether it's Ouagadougou or Bangkok, and I want to write an African story, who is my African audience? And you know, what is this African audience? Who are they? What power do they hold? And anyone is welcome to start, if you don't mind, like raising your hand if you want to address this question.
Okay, Anna, let me start.
Go
I think
ahead,
this
Johnny.
This African audience is everywhere. I always ask this question, what actually is an African story? Is the story told by an African in Africa, or is the story told by an African outside of Africa? So for me, the African audience is actually a global audience, because Africa is not a monolith. Now, you see the world is moving at a very fast pace. So this African audience might be sitting in Berlin, might be sitting in Melbourne, might be sitting in Ouagadougou, might be. This African audience is a global audience. So I always say to people, we don't have to just wait for people on our continent to buy what we're selling because of the challenges around internet, for example, connectivity and all of that. But sometimes once these stories have gone outside and have gotten traction outside of our continent, consumed by our diaspora in the US where you are, Canada, Australia, all over there, those stories will actually find themselves back here. And I also give this example. If I am to make a film in Swahili, right, or I will make a film in Shona, which is a language spoken in Zimbabwe just next door. So every person who speaks Shona in the world is actually my audience. So the Pan-African audience speaks all the languages, lives all over the world. Sometimes the audience that is outside might be closer to the story than the audience sitting inside. So if we then waste our time to just focus on the audience at home, we are missing the point. So for me, and the platform we're setting up now, we want to make sure that we tell that story in our languages. That story needs to travel, even if it has to come back home, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years later. It's not a problem, as long as there is an audience for that story. And that audience, honestly, does not have to be African, really. That's because the story is global. Anybody. And I don't think we should actually limit our story to only our people here at home or abroad. So that's my answer. I know it's kind of quite broad, but I think you get the point.
Thanks, Johnny. I'm just going to open it up to someone who hasn't spoken yet. Tamara, if I can hear what, you know, from a producer like you, what is your definition of a Pan-African audience?
I don't think there's one definition. I think with every project at a certain stage in the development of it, which often doesn't happen until a producer is attached, you do start to think about, you know, who is the audience, what is their profile, because that starts to be how you position and package the film. I think it's something that traditionally, you know, screenwriters, especially if we're talking about emerging writers on the continent, don't necessarily think about from the onset. I think this is also an area where there's potential for a lot of clash and issues of how, you know, what Tembe spoke to, but how the stories are being told. And why do we get so many stories out of the continent that look like they're being filtered through this 3-story, very, you know, sort of industrial arc of how we tell stories, this European lens. And I think it's almost to take a step back before we think about our audiences and think about the power dynamics in terms of how African stories are primarily financed on the continent. Who is funding those? We know if we look into some of the statistics around script development, if you look at a indie, low budget Ethiopian film, Swahili Bonga film, probably it went through 1 or 2 passes of the script because there is no funding to support someone to spend a year and a half to navel gaze and go through all the drafts and have a consultant. But then if you go into Southern Europe, that script has gone through maybe 8 or 10 drafts. And then if you go into the Nordic countries where there's a lot more money, and Canada, you know, sits in the middle, you're going to get Nordic countries with like 25, 30 passes at their scripts. So there's already that disadvantage in terms of what money can we access to make the thing. The issue that a lot of that money sits in Europe or is adjudicated by people who are not African. So, I mean, I've gotten wildly insane notes from some European financing institutions that I know come from the jury, that I know is all white people, that are trying to make this film that they can benchmark against other European films. And that's the lens through which they vet our content and our stories. So I think we have to be more radical and really push for change in terms of who has the money, where the money is controlled, who's going to own the IP of our films, and who is adjudicating the films, because that is sort of the policy issue that starts and then overshadows why do the films look the way that they do when they come out? Why are the stories like this? Why are the scripts underdeveloped? And then once we have more control of those things, we can start to better, I think, substantiate who the audiences are that we want to have our films reach. Because if you speak to many African writer-directors, while their story may translate well and will find global audiences, they also may have a very specific community, a very specific audience in their own country, in their own region, that for them, that metric of success is making sure that those communities see the film, making sure that those communities are in conversation about the story. But that's often another area for conflict because of the financing sources, because for the French producer, the German producer, perhaps even, the American producer, the metrics of success are something different, which is about something happening in other places. So I think screenwriters also have to your point, Anna, think more about audience, but also be really bold to say that these are the audiences that are important to me. And this is success for me with my film, should it be made. The other thing I think that Hilliard was talking about, in terms of writers' rooms and opportunities for African writers, and this, somewhat fading, sudden hyper focus on Black and African content as a reaction to people realizing that they're racist. We also have to be really protective of the experience for those writers going into those writers' rooms, because I've heard really not good stories about African writers who were involved in that African Queen show. I've heard those stories from many writers' rooms, and I think there's the balance between the responsibility of the person leading the writer's room to how are you bringing someone in? Is this a safe space? Are you using someone sort of as a cultural consultant or to slap their name up so that your positionality is not so far removed from the thing you're talking about? And also, was this the correct writer to have in the room? Because I get requests all the time for, here's a film or a TV show in Cote d'Ivoire, a documentary in Senegal. Do you have someone? And I'm like, I represent Ethiopian writer-directors. They're not the person with the correct positionality. And also, they don't speak French. So why would you want me to send them in to help you with those things? So I think it's, the onus is on us to really demand more in terms of our rights, but also on those that we're collaborating with to be a little more humanist. So I don't know, Anna, hopefully that answers somewhat of the question.
Oh yeah, I think those are some great points. I won't list them all, but I've taken notes, and the document I'll share at the end will be a working document anyway. So if I've missed anything, there'll be definitely spaces to chime in. I'm just not going to keep repeating for the sake of time now. Is anyone want to raise their hand to contribute to the same question, or can we move on to the next one?
I can. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead, your race.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I just wanted to share that, my audiences look different. I have been, I guess I'd say, privileged to explore different ways of communicating my storytelling. And one of the things that's been very important for me as a storyteller is I've grown up seeing a lot of, films, like even series like The Bold and the Beautiful, Days of Our Lives. And I really never could see myself in those things. And so what I ended up doing was working towards producing so that I can be able to share my work with my fellow countrymen. So 2 of my films are currently on a national tour, and this is one of them I wrote and one of them I directed. But it's sometimes collaborations like that that are helping me to reach into the areas where I know people don't have access to cinema. And one of the other things that I've been doing is finding residency programs where I know that I will be able to host artist talks and be able to talk about my work and share my work with others, because most of the time I'm introducing myself and the question is always, oh, that's a difficult name. How do you say it? Or where are you from? I've never heard of it before. So I have been working towards taking these stories and, sharing them with different audiences. And one of the best experiences I've had was attending the Cascade Festival for African Films. I was the visiting director this year, and it was such a beautiful, empowering experience. This is where I also encountered some beautiful works by African filmmakers. And I think that, accessing these platforms and these opportunities also just breaks the glass ceilings. I think the idea of being convinced that you're a cat when you're a lion, you end up mewing instead of roaring. So in being exposed to other creatives and accessing, portals as people, obviously, and conversations where your mind is unlocked and you can see the possibilities there, then you can experience a wider audience. So I think our work has a space, it has a place everywhere. However, for me, the most gratifying was being able to share my work in Botswana, as well as building my African community here in the US.
Thank you. Tambe, did you want to chime in there or?
Um, I think I was going to jump off on something that Tamara said, but in short, I think what I remember now is it's important to cultivate an audience. I think Russell mentioned it. I think Harvard. I think everybody on this talk has probably mentioned talked about whether the audience is going to be there for the work itself. Um, Audiences have to be cultivated. It's not going to happen overnight. These are in the African context. You're looking at industries that are very uneven. And many don't even. I'm even hesitant to use the word industry in some cases because there really isn't one in many African countries. Um, and so these are industries in quotes or ecosystems, landscapes, whatever word you want to use, that are still sort of emerging and themselves finding themselves. They're emerging, in a global industry. They're trying to sort of integrate themselves into a global industry, primarily the United States and Europe and even Asia, that has been around for a century. And these are countries that are still sort of reeling from independence. We're still decolonizing in a way. The decolonization is not done. The Europeans may have left, but they're still there in many ways, physically, but also psychologically. So you're looking at countries in Africa, and this is the whole world. I mean, Hollywood movies dominate the landscape by far. In many African countries, cities where there are movie theaters, and there are almost 1,700 or so less movie theaters across the continent, primarily about 60-75% of them in South Africa. Um, they're dominated by American movies, by Hollywood studio big budget movies, and so you have audiences that are growing up in the last 30 years that are watching these. That's what they're watching. That's what they're growing up on, and so it's hard to take. If we're talking within Africa itself, it's hard for local filmmakers to compete with that, and then the theater owners themselves have to then decide, how it becomes a sort of essentially a question of whether or not you want to make money as a theater owner. You want to sell tickets, what movies are selling. And then there's sort of a ripple effect, but it's like top down, but also bottom up. But it'll take time to cultivate audiences worldwide, not just in Africa, worldwide for these films. And I anticipate that in the next, something I've been saying for some time, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, I think you're going to see an international marketplace that will very likely see a variety and diversity in African storytelling cinematically that we haven't seen in a long time, if ever, given the wealth of initiatives that we're seeing that are targeting African talent on the production side primarily. Very little going on the distribution side, on the audience cultivation side. So my question always is, when all these films that are getting funding from Berlin, or the World Cinema Fund, from Hubert Balls, from the CNC, and the various initiatives, something that Tamara said, I mean, much of the money is coming from Europe, and probably a huge chunk of it is coming from France, very specifically. Um, and so when all these films come out in the next, let's say beginning 2025 and on, where are the audience for them? Who's going to pick them up? What distributors are going to buy them and get them into theaters? I don't think that's a question that's really being asked currently, because much of the funding is going on the front end, not on the back end, which is when they're made and they're going to be coming out. What happens then? We'll find out. But this is the time to really begin to cultivate audiences. Um, and part of the work that I do is really digging up, sort of trying to make a connection between past and present to demonstrate that there's a continuity between those those post-colonial years when you had the pioneers doing the work that they were doing and laying the sort of foundation, uh, and then sort of building, laying a foundation for the filmmaking that we have today. But it seems like there's sort of a disconnect in some cases, I think. So
I just want to interject there, Tembe, because I
sure.
actually want to ask for a little clarification on what, or for you to define what you mean by cultivate, because to be fair, like what the retreat itself, the Pan African Screenwriters Retreat, stems from what initially motivated me to start the Pan African Film Podcast, and that podcast itself was born out of something you just mentioned, which is, initially maybe 20 years ago, when I started in the industry, it was to see more representation. But as you say, there are African films being churned out, at least 200 per country, and obviously with the Nollywood and South African markets churning out way more than that. And yes, as Tamara mentioned, the sources of funding for these productions can often dictate their distribution channels. But I'm not sure what you mean by cultivating an audience, because I believe quite strongly, but without factual evidence, due to the lack of resources in the research invested in the industry globally, that there is a Pan-African audience that is thriving. So when you say cultivated, I actually see it in reverse. The economics I've often seen and studied in the entertainment industry demonstrate that it's more about pushing down those doors so that you get the access to an existing audience, not really the other way around, where you have to cultivate that audience. I've seen across the industry where people have done shows in other maybe not film, but like in the comedy field or in the music field, like Russell was mentioning with Afrobeats, where once people could just go live on YouTube and then go to a festival in Austin and actually demonstrate their work, that they showed that there was demand for Afrobeats. Afrobeats has been around for like a long time. So was that audience just now? Is there like an Afrobeats audience suddenly? No, there's been an Afrobeats audience, right? It's how do we adapt or change or I guess take ownership of the industry in terms of finding capital or access to it that might be different to, as you say, the 70% that comes from France or Europe. So that's just my perspective, but I'd rather you define a little better what you mean by cultivating.
Are there niche audiences for specific films? Sure. I'm not trying to think of the quickest way to do this. So you take Nigeria, for example. Nollywood, there's a Nollywood ecosystem. The films never really rarely leave Nigeria. If they do, it's on streaming. The Nigerian diaspora in the UK, exactly, mostly in the UK, but also in the US, they will watch the films on Netflix or Amazon Prime Video. They'll never travel beyond that. Like many of the films that release in Nigeria, you'll never see them. They stay in Nigeria, but they do well in Nigeria. Not all of them, but some of them do. And you have local talent, you have local stars that are thriving, that are doing well, because they're not interested in breaking beyond Nigeria. And you find that in a very few African countries, not many. And so essentially cultivation means uh, time. So it means taking them. I mean, Afrobeat is music. You know, I think film is a culmination of sound, of image. It's probably the most powerful medium there is. So when you have a world, not just in Africa, but a world, but even in Africa, which is why I made the point to point out to mention that when you have this African audiences themselves are not always watching African films. When I'm on Twitter, it just conversation with Nigerians. Many of them are shitting. I'm sorry, maybe I should. Sorry for my language, but they're speaking ill of Nigerian films because they're comparing them to Hollywood movies. It's like, well, why can't we make those films, right? Because they're not used to seeing, or they just think that there's something unequal, there's an imbalance. They think that their own local films are not good enough because they're being raised on $200 million Hollywood movies that travel to Nigerian
Yeah, thank you.
theaters. And it's the same that is the one that I sorry, I got hello. Okay. Sergio Bass's film is one of the film that comes right to mind. I mean, in Nigeria itself, the film was, for all intents and purposes, kind of suppressed. Um, Eyimofe is not a Nigerian film that didn't do well in Nigeria, but yet it did well internationally. When I say did well, I don't mean it made a bunch of money, but it did. Those are films that attracted critical acclaim that actually played in American and European theaters. Most Nigerian films would not do that. So cultivating, it's a longer conversation, but really um, it's what I'm saying is it's taking the time, the same amount of time, maybe not 100 years that Hollywood has had, but taking the time to essentially train the audience to appreciate different sort of the nuances of African storytelling and Nigerian storytelling and South African storytelling, so that when they see these films, they're not foreign to them. They're not wondering what it is I'm watching, which is typically the case. I mean, I don't think that's arguable. I mean, I think it's just, I think these films don't do well. And like, that's just the truth of it. I mean, these films that even get picked up and they're released in Europe and in the States, they're not doing well. Most distributors won't even touch African films, especially in the United States and North America. So when they're released here, it's very small, very limited art house circuits. And so there is a need to show that there is a variety of stories and there are nuances to the stories and there's a different African experience. There are 54 plus minus countries, different cultures, different languages. There's a reason why subtitle films don't do as well as English language films. So I think
Thanks.
it really just comes down to
Yeah.
time. Is essentially what I'm saying.
Yeah. I guess for me, when you were measuring or in some way defining the success levels of the African films doing well, I never really look at it from Hollywood being the measuring stick for Pan-African productions. But I want to hear from Tamara as well, who's got her hand up. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add that there's some films that easily find an audience, but there's also some genres that do not have a appreciation or understanding in many African countries. And I think that, that happens a lot with genre films. And I think there's a more specific example with documentaries. Because if we look historically at when documentaries have been successful in the last couple of decades in Africa, I mean, I know in Ethiopia, people didn't want to watch docs for a very long time. And it's a new sort of format that people are being turned on to because docs were seen and often still are seen as a government propaganda. When the government wants to push a certain position or bring forward a certain bit of information, they're still making a documentary and airing it on television. And that, maybe in some countries, a hangover from communism, a hangover from dictatorships of the past and present. I mean, these are the toolkits of using doc and using film done by Mussolini, by Hitler. Those things also happen on the continent, and I think that also taints people's perspectives about certain genres of films. I think that docs specifically are often seen as something where white people are coming in to tell us about ourselves and make really extractive production. So I think sometimes some genres, it's also about reintroducing African audiences to those stories and finding ways for films from other parts of the continent to be accessible, because we may make films, we may show them in our countries, and then they go abroad, but we don't really have a lot of support and opportunities to circulate across the continent.
Right. So that interregional connectivity, communication, and building sort of that infrastructure. Absolutely. So I'm gonna jot here a poll question to you all, which you can like answer as the conversation goes. And it's basically, you know, what does the industry look like? How many Pan-African screenwriters do you think there are, right? Like, just piggybacking off of Tambe's comments earlier, like this is an industry where we see a need and an interest in African stories emerging, but you know, how many are we? Like, who's done that research? So I just want to ask you as a panel all together to just answer the poll and let me know what your thoughts are. And then moving on to, you know, actually the next topic that I wanted to explore here, and that's, you know, already been addressed partially. And that's to do with the finances. Oh, sorry, 1 second. I think we have.
It's me, Z.
Z, did you want to chime in?
Yeah. Now, before you go to your other question, you know, just listening in, you know, I think what we are collectively not mentioning so far, you know, we talked about stories, talked about audience and different aspects of how to where to position our stories and all of that. But I think what we're forgetting is, as a writer, to me, the most important thing is actually the characters that we create. So the characters that are fully realized, that have their own agency, that are comfortable in their own skin, that are well developed. I think the story comes second to that. If we are, I see it happen here in Ethiopia, and Tamara knows about this. The characters that are in these films that we produce, 200 and something of them a year, are very caricature-like. They're very cartoonish. And so I think it starts, if we create characters that are memorable, that have goals, that have motivation, that are well-rounded. You know, it takes me a year and a half, maybe more, to actually develop a screenplay. And I think we have probably as African storytellers, we don't put emphasis enough on the characters that we create. I watch Nigerian Nollywood films, and I could not name you one actor that stood out from all those films. One character that was memorable, even from our Ethiopian films. So I think this being a screenwriters, Pan African Screenwriters retreat, we need to spend more time on creating these characters. I think if we have those characters that audience wanted to take their journey with them, that probably would decide on how widely that film is going to be distributed and all of that.
Thank you. Makosi?
Thank you. I just wanted to chime in and say that, you know, I understand that you know, at the end of it all, the core of why we're here is screenwriting and developing writing practices that can help us to better tell our stories is important. But I just wanted to share that I recently watched Funke Adinkele. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name correctly. I watched her film, and it's I think The Tribe of Benjamin, and I was wowed. I absolutely loved that film. And one of the things I kept repeating when I watched it was how you can tell it's scripted. You can tell that this is a film that has a great script to it. And so I think that we have stories. We just have to invest in our screenwriters. We have to invest in our script writers, because the ideation of these films, it stems from that. So you cannot produce a good film if the script is not good. You cannot make a film that is worth taking anywhere if the script is not well researched and those characters are not well built and there's no concept of universality in it. Like, there's so much that is so complex and layered about how to, bring it all together, but it all stems from the script writing process. And so I think one of the things that's important for me today is, how can we build an ecosystem where our script writers can thrive, right? How do we empower and build capacity in our screenwriters from Africa or in the diaspora, where they can be in a position not to worry about health, not to worry about finances, but to sit where they're most comfortable, whether it's in an artist residency program or wherever, and actually write these stories, because that is where the quality of our films is decided. That is how we create good quality films that can make it and be successful absolutely anywhere. So I think we have to just remember to take it back there. And I can't say I've watched every film. I used to be one of those people who used to complain, especially about the quality of films. But having encountered new works by filmmakers from Africa that are doing so well, I think that it's really more about, okay, let's cultivate an environment where, and I think that's what you're doing, Anna. That's what you're doing with this retreat. So
Yes.
what we should be deciding is, okay, when is the next retreat? How do we bring more people to sign off on it? How do we bring more resources into it? How do we get people from Botswana? Because I know my friends are watching from Botswana. How do we bring them here so that they can be equipped to a standard where, okay, you're given the time to write, you're also given the resources, and immediately after that, you have the opportunities to pitch to producers who are ready and excited about your work, because it's also about creating an excitement about the work. Like,
Yeah.
we want to be
Sorry,
excited.
Magosi, I hate to
Oh,
interrupt, but
sorry.
I'm just conscious of timing at the moment.
Okay,
And I
sorry.
want to check in with the panelists, because we were supposed to conclude at 12:30. But I do want to touch on some of the other questions that are still pending. And I just want to check in with everybody. Could you raise your hand if you're not okay for another 30 minutes? And we can take it from there. Is everyone okay to stay on? Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And not to cut you off, Magosi, because you're raising some huge points here, but just to again bring it into the perspective of the retreat and what we're going to be using this for. And definitely we want to continue the dialogue. So I just wanted to explain that for our audience, that yes, the outcome of this specific panel session will be sort of I guess like a straw man document that's going to list all these challenges. And that's why I want to move on to the next session where we address them, because I want the straw man to initiate a series of dialogues. So the retreat will be an annual event. We're already using this as a pilot to promote the next one. And the vision we have is to really create them so that they're very Pan-African. And the next one will be on the continent, with the alternating annually, one on the continent, one in the diaspora, one on the continent, one in diaspora, and also to circulate the program regionally across the continent so that every voice is heard. Ultimately, and that's why I put the poll in the chat, because when we got into brainstorming, which is what we're going to move into now, in terms of solutions, the real question is, how many are we, right? We talk about Pan African screenwriters, but who are we and how many are we? So, because if you think of ecosystems, we've heard about cultivating audiences, we've heard about finding or networking or programs that kind of bring us together. So how many are we? Because obviously, if you're creating an infrastructure or a system of support for a group that's 100,000 or 500, 500,000 people, it's going to look very different to creating an infrastructure or a system that is going to be supportive of a group of 100, right? So I do think that's like the first kind of question to hopefully carry forward from this discussion. And I'm really interested in your answers, and opening up now to Hilliard. Go ahead, Hilliard.
I'm sure everybody's thinking like it's a very hard question to answer. I mean, just think about this. I've been writing for 24, 25 years. I'll be 54 in September 5th. You know, we black folks. And so here's a funny thing.
Definitely looking good.
Thank you. At the Writers Guild, I don't think before George Floyd, we tried to do a toll of this. It might have been close to 1,000 Black writers.
I really appreciate this. And I just want to add for the audience, because I don't
Yeah.
think you mentioned in your intro, Hilliard, that you were a part of the, is it called the African American Committee?
I didn't say that part, but I mentioned the guild.
Yes,
yeah,
that,
yeah,
you know, Hilliard
I was the co-chair.
Hilliard was part of that committee, which is an important committee that sits within the Screenwriters Guild here, the Writers Guild of America. And I'm not sure if most of the audience is aware, definitely the ones that are here in the US, you know, there was a whole strike for the majority of last year. So again, this conversation is not like haphazard. It happened to be a time when I transitioned full-time into screenwriting myself. And it's really, that's what triggered this conversation in terms of, if I'm writing for a Pan-African audience, then what does that mean for me? Where are my rights being protected? And so I do want to jump into those main issues on financial support, labor rights, and, you know, like common questions that are for screenwriters, like what are residuals?
Can I just finish what I was saying? I apologize.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I thought you finished. Go ahead, Hilary.
No, you interrupted me, girl. No, I'm kidding. So what happened was, where I was going was in trying to figure out what the number is. I think it's almost impossible to figure out. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of us. And the reason I say that is because in this climate, we are at a time now where if there's, let's say, 1,000 or even 1,500 of us in the Writers Guild alone, there's probably another 20,000 just trying to get in, right? That are just here, probably in California. Like there's that many people trying to get in right now, right? And then you spread it out across the states where everybody writes. There's always a film school, there's always a whatever, and there's hundreds or thousands there. You know, that's just here. And then, you know, there's writers, of course, all across Europe and, you know, the diaspora and Africa and all the, there's just no way to tally that up. You can't even do a poll to figure that out, you know, because you're going to miss somebody to do it. That's all I'm saying. And we were able to figure out what the numbers were. We got close, but the guild has certain rules where they don't allow certain things out. So we know it's roughly around this many people. That's why I gave you that gap between like 800 and like 1,500, because we grow every day, you know, with the black, on the Black side, that is for sure. It keeps growing. And some of those writers are African writers, you know.
Yeah.
My friend who does the Nollywood and Hollywood, he's in the Writers Guild, and he's been in the guild for a long time, like 20 years maybe. So
if we were to talk and I wish Johnny was still on, because I think he's been trying to fund Pan African Chamber of Commerce, and under it sort of structure for a film commission. But my attention and focus has always been specifically for screenwriters. And if we were to talk about a Pan African guild, specifically for screenwriters, what would that look like for you? Like in the sense of the need to quantify who we are is really just for the purpose of creating that infrastructure. But if we were to start an infrastructure, how would you like initiate something like that?
Well, our guilds are put together to help us with pension and health. Those are two of the biggest checkpoints on there. And I think somebody mentioned earlier about um, uh, not only like education, but it's also about making sure you're being paid a certain amount of money so that you can live, in whatever city you live in. And so there are certain rules depending on what cities you live in also, even if you're in the guild, where there's certain things that, production companies could do to probably get you to work a little less, depending on what the contract is, in order for them to hire a Writers Guild writer, and our whole thing is, as long as you can look into our pension and health, those are the important things. And of course, that you're making enough money to live wherever you're living is the important thing. So if there was a way to build a Pan African guild of some sort, it would be hard to do because you have so many different countries,
Yeah.
that it would be difficult. But yeah, it'd be hard. I don't know how to do it, but there could be, well, like here's an example. We have the Producers Guild. The Producers Guild is not a union. People don't know that. So anybody can join the Producers Guild if you qualify. If you've done some movie, if you've done some TV show or whatever, some people can get in. But there might be a guild you guys can build that just isn't an actual union, that has some protections where your writers write under a certain agreement, and somebody could agree to hire the writers under that. And if they don't, then your guild can, put pressure on them, and they could become known that you have to take care of anybody in this guild a certain way. It could be another way to build it out, but it would be a lot of work for sure.
That's awesome insight. Tamara, you have a question or something to chime in?
Just to comment on that, I mean, I think it's probably a fool's errand right now to try to have a Pan-African guild. Also because of all the different countries, but also because of the fact that there is no producers guilds for them to associate with. So the Writers Guild comes up with its whatever it is, but who are you holding to account? I think that, there are ways without those organizations to have some of the screen organizations have more of what would look like terms of trade. Sort of trying to humanize people, that if you are trying to do this work, these are suggestions around how you engage writers, how much they should be paid, what they're getting on the back end. There may be ways to do those things, but again, those would be suggestions towards those people that are more prepared to be equitable in how they're producing, and that I don't think anyone has a large stick to cause people to behave correctly. And I think a lot of that like behavior change is less so onto the African producers, although we're not all wonderful. I think African producers don't pay writers well because they don't have money to pay anyone. The issue is more so the European producers who think, oh, you live in Kampala, you live in Bangui, like you don't, like it doesn't cost you money, you don't need that much money. And I mean, I've strangely seen some scenarios where, to my surprise, the European fund has gone back to the producer and said, no, you have to pay the writer more. So those are the exceptions that are starting to happen, but I think it's about pushing for standards and collective standards. And as some people start to onboard them and those can become cases for success, that may help, but it's also about calling out the bad actors.
Okay. That's interesting too. Okay, so let's dive into those questions about labor rights residuals, Hilliard mentioned pension and health. So what would that look like at a Pan-African level if we were to introduce like cross-border solutions? Do any of you have ideas on how to kind of address the challenges we've listed?
I'll go about it in a roundabout way. So when it comes to creating a Writers Guild for Africa, when we look at I don't have a good history of when the WGA was created in the States, but at that particular time, there were very specific challenges that it was addressing at the time it was created. Now, in today's age, there are while there are significant avenues to be able to generate incomes, there are also significant avenues that are disseminating incomes. And then what's being done to capture the opportunities and to minimize, for lack of a better word, the losses that would come about as a result of having a Writers Guild. I say that in this respect. When the writer's strike took place last year, while it was deemed a success to a larger extent, the aspect of AI coming into the picture was not, at least in my opinion, I stand to be corrected, but in my opinion, that was not addressed. Because while we have the writers fighting for their fair share of what, say, would come from the streaming and that nature of things, but when you look at the streaming giants that we have today, there's just maybe two of them that are profitable in that sense. But when you look at what was being addressed, say, for AI, which will obviously be impacting the Writers Guild that's created, say, around that for Pan-African writers, content is being scraped and being regenerated to create other content. Newspapers like when you talk about the New York Times and all these other places, getting their lawyers to start suing such that they're getting a cut of what's being generated from what is scraped in their content, and they're finding ways to see when their content is scraped to generate other content and that nature of things. Now, technologically, I don't know if that infrastructure will be right there, such that okay, as this Writers Guild is being created, that is being factored in, because AI is going to definitely, while it is an opportunity, but it also presents that challenge of disseminating income. So there has to be a way right from the get-go, although it's already a trend that's going right now, but there has to be a way such that there's a cut that the creators are getting anytime their content is script for building AI stories and that nature of things. So that would be one of those things in respect to the market challenges that are there today. How will aspects of, say, AI be integrated into how the compensation is done? That's just, one.
Can I interject just a little bit? I'm not going to push back, but I'll just tell you some facts from the Writers Guild side. Is we actually did work out some things in our contract where the studios are not allowed to use AI to write scripts without humans, for example. What they found is, we knew they would do it, they'd found a loophole. So, for example, they may not hire or bring in somebody to copy and paste, let's say, a log line and make a script out of it, but they'll take your script and put it through AI and do coverage. So they found little ways to do it, and I'm hearing that a lot, in certain studios and networks and pods. That's what's happening. But they're not supposed to be allowed to actually write a script through AI and put it through the system without a human being doing it right now. You know, just to be clear, that doesn't mean we're not still afraid of they'll find a loophole somewhere, you know, which, you know, that's what they do. But what here's what I will say. I've actually encouraged writers to learn about Chat GPT and all that other stuff because you need to know what's going on with whatever technology is, right? And this is from somebody who's not Mr. Technical, by the way. But there are tools you can use that can help you as a writer when it comes to AI. Here's an example. I don't want to take up too much time with this. Say you have a log line for your script or your book or whatever, and you just can't figure it out. You could put it into AI and say, make this better, make this darker, make it more, have it more energy, give it whatever, and it will give you 7 or 8 different ideas. And it's what it should do. Instead of you copying and pasting what they wrote, what you should do is go, oh, I like how they did that. Now I can do my version of it. So it should inspire you. It shouldn't make you be a copy and paste person. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm trying to, whether it's on my podcast or wherever, I'm always encouraging writers, if you use it, here's how to use it to your best ability so that you grow from it, as opposed to becoming lazy from it. You know what I mean? So that's my thought. But you're definitely right on some of the stuff, for sure.
No, I love it. I love it, Hilliard, because I also have that perspective and optic when it comes to any kind of technology, not just AI. I do see it as benefiting the industry and opening up avenues. Just to share something that's happening right now at the retreat, where we have finalists in Accra and Nigeria taking part. You know, the fact that we moved part of the programming online has enabled them to be a part of this conversation. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in the sense of what AI technology can do for our writers. So I don't see it as a challenge that can't be overcome, for sure.
And yeah, and Hilda and Anna, I like what you said, because I equally champion the aspect of like using ChatGPT. It's just like you're saying, I'll always run ideas by it such that it can be some good jump off point to generate ideas. Like, you know, when you say, hey, give me the best headlines you could have for this, or, you know, like you're saying, a jump off type of point when you're trying to come up with a title, and or just some, like you're saying, some type of energy, some type of tone, and then you build off of on that. And that's really good. And the aspect that I might not be addressing it very well is when their protection, because like, for example, when the internet came about, we had newspapers that saw the internet as the Google as their friend in respect to, oh, we can publish have our publications shared on Google and or whichever search engine was being used at that point, and there would be a percentage of that ad revenue that would be generated for whatever publisher and that nature of things. But the model shifted slowly, and before you realized it, most of it was just going to the, you know, the search engine dominant at that particular point. And our newspapers were literally disseminated to a larger extent. And that's kind of like I'm kind of concerned in that aspect of, yes, there's definitely an aspect of how we work with AI in a way that benefits us. But right now, as AI is, it's not profitable. It's not profitable, but by the time they fine tune it and they monetize it very well, it's going to be phenomenal. And the question is, how well are we putting those guards in place such that it's integrated? And this is a long shot type of conversation, but it's just something to think about. Like when it's optimized such that it's like Google now, where OpenAI is as profitable in that sense, will creatives have thought enough or be integrated well enough such that you're getting your fair share of that cut when those profits are coming into play. That's kind of the conversation I'm driving at, but I might not be articulating it very well.
Yeah. Tambe has a question or something to add.
So I'm gonna be that guy and say that look, if you're not worried about AI, you're not paying attention. It's to me, it's if not even from a screenwriter's perspective, man, from a writer's perspective, from a creative vantage point, you have to be really concerned about what this is, for how much. The future is so uncertain. I don't know how quickly these tools are going to be commercialized. How much they're going to sort of permeate the landscape. I've seen Sora. I've used Sora. That's the text to video application that OpenAI is going to release probably later this year. I've used Gen 3 from Runway. Um, and I've used ChatGPT for a variety of things. And looking at just this is version 1.0. These are just the early stages of these applications. And I don't think it's too far into the future where when we begin to see them become really dominant tools in terms of film and TV production. I think it was Ashton Kutcher. There was a video circulating of Ashton Kutcher, I think, a couple of months ago, that people thought was just kind of nonsense. And I think that's kind of where my head is as well. I think we're heading towards a time when this could be, given the speed at which these things are improving, this could be 5 to 10 years out, maybe 10 years, when somebody's just sitting at home and these applications have become so evolved. If we're now looking at version 10, 20.0, I don't know. There's been some consolidation with some of these organizations, the video, the photo, the audio. I've seen editing tools, I've seen audio applications, all AI based. In 5 to 10 years, when somebody's just sitting at home and they just type in a prompt. I want to see a movie like this, and it's just one paragraph description of it, and they sit back, and maybe an hour later, it spits out a movie, and it's 8K, I don't know, whatever, 100K, whatever it is at the time. It looks great. They have their 60-inch TV in the house, and they sit back and they watch it, and it looks just like the real thing. So it's not to really scare anyone. I mean, but I feel like we already should be there. We already should be thinking about what the long term looks like, because I really think that unless there's some kind of government intervention, this would have to be probably a global effort to sort of slow this down, which I think that's all we really can really do is slow it down. I don't think we can stop it. It's already happening. I think that's kind of what we're looking at. So um, in a way, many of these conversations will just be kind of like, why are we even having these conversations, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have them, by the way, but when I look at what's coming down the pipe, I really, there are many, even as a critic, and I'm seeing a lot of, I've sort of become adept at catching what I think are AI generated articles and writing, because there's just certain cadence and certain words that are used when people use things like ChatGPT and Bing, and then Google's Gemini and Claude AI and all of that. But I will not be surprised if I mean, it's already being used. So, but I'll not be surprised. I don't really know how much these tools are being used. Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, has already been doing his Hollywood tour for the last year or so. Tribeca Film Festival was the first sort of major film festival to say we're going to have an AI category, and I would expect that in 2025. I will not be surprised. I mean, Cannes, the biggest festival in the world this year, had a digital category. They've never done that before. This is for the cinephiles, for the cineasts. This is a pure film cinema festival, and they had a digital category for the first time this year with VR, AR. 2025, 2026, I'm only surprised if you see the Sundances of the world, the Torontos of the world begin to also introduce virtual, digital, AI, AR categories as well, because I think that's just where we are. So all that to say, look, use the tools, man. Learn what they can do and use them however you think they will benefit you. And always thinking ahead, just thinking ahead of what this could be, because people tend to kind of dismiss these things. I've seen so many comments and they say, "Oh, that looks terrible." Oh, come on, I could tell that was AI generated. and they don't think, it's almost like they think that they're just going
Please
to
don't
stay.
use them to write a script.
No, they're not there yet. They're not there yet. No. But the thing is that I think they will get there. I think they will get there in time. But I can see, I think just as Hilliard and others have said, I think you incorporate them into your workflow, because I think they have uses right now. Where they are in 5, 10 years, I think that's the real concern. And I think the entire box just gets blown up. Then the ripple effects, man, will be really, really something. I mean, you're talking actors no longer needed. You're talking filmmakers no longer needed. You're talking like what does that industry look like in 10 years? Nobody knows, you know. So that's the fear, that's the concern, that's the worry. I think that's why you're seeing a lot of sort of risk averse investment, because the studios just don't know what to do. They're not really sure where things are, so they're just relying on tried and true IP. That's it. So, thanks.
Okay, yeah. We've started like over here just even talking, and to be honest, AI is kind of like a Pandora's box in terms of comments, because we could stay on forever, but like it being the last 5 minutes, I don't want to dwell on it too much. We were just going back and forth here with Tato, like it's also how you perceive it. For her, AI is kind of, there is a fear element or threat element that you were describing. I don't see it that way. I see it more as a tool that can be embraced, kind of just how 20 years ago or more than that, the World Wide Web could have seen something as something ominous and like taking over researchers' work or all of that. We've, over time been able to embrace it and integrate it into daily life. And I just see AI as something like that. People will be able to see the difference between an AI generated script and a non-AI generated script. And I think writers need to hone in on new skills, such as how do we write good prompts, for example. And those are some trainings that have to be integrated in the current training programs, for example. So I see it as adapting to a very new tool that is a huge tool, that we don't know the whole breadth of the tool right now, but that I don't see it with that. I don't look at it with that perception of fear myself. And I'll take one more question from Makosi, but I'm conscious we have 4 minutes, so I just really want to keep it to a minute or two for anyone who has the final comments.
Thank you, Anna. I just wanted to share, I'll be brief, that I think, the focus also, you should consider getting into distribution, like setting up, if it's going to be YouTube, make it a YouTube channel where you can seek out stories. And what might have looked like, limitations for many people could be an opening up of a platform where Pan African stories can be streamed online. Like we really can't be waiting all the time for doors to be open for us. We have to use what we have to get what we want. And it can be helpful also to have a part of you that extends to a film festival. And you can be very like, you can focus on unique things. Like if you want to do the genre route and like look for sci-fi because you know that there's not a lot of production there, you can do that. I believe in, developing solutions for every problem that exists. And I think this is an opportunity to have like a writer space. I created Kwalang, where I brought writers, and most of them were from Botswana, to just meet online and write. And I did that because I wanted to write my first feature film. So if that could be something that you can cultivate for us to just hop on and actually write, because it can be so difficult to be writing in our own individual spaces, I think I would really endorse that and help in whatever way I can. But I believe that we have each other right now. You have so many minds here, so much intellect moving across this Zoom. There's so many ideas, and it would be nice to just, build from here and not wait for the bigger thing, because the big thing is just being able to meet and start right now, start here. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So unless someone has a burning question, I do think that's a wonderful way to end. I am totally taking this as a baby step, a first step to probably like what might feel like a drop in an ocean in terms of the challenges and the work that's out there. But I will be doing the follow-ups as promised and starting this as a series of dialogues, at least annually, with enough room to kind of give it some shape and form that is inclusive of everybody's voice. So thank you, big, huge thank you for everyone taking part in this. Yeah, and we'll be we'll be reaching out with a straw man, capturing as much of this as possible. And then once you've all had an opportunity to feedback any missing points or changes you want seen, we'll also open up what I hope will be kind of a petition for a way forward for this dialogue to continue. Thank you so much. And thank you to
Thank
our
you.
viewers all over the world, really. I think there's people coming in for everywhere. I know, Tamara, you were asking where are people coming in, but we didn't have a huge audience, but I think they were from all over, including the continent. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye.